Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive in Tech podcast. Today we have Andrew Brown as our guest. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, so listeners should recognize you from your cloud courses. I've taken a few of them and your GitHub course. I have not taken the exam yet, but you put together great courses.
Well, I try to do my best. I mean, there's just always more to do. So,
Yes. So to get us started, why don't you just kind of walk the listeners through kind of your tech career and how you got into creating educational cloud content?
sure. Yeah. So, the way I got into tech is a very long road. I mean, I've been in tech for a long time, I should say, because we had a family business fixing computers.
Hmm.
My mother, before that, she was an administrator for Bell Canada, the telecoms company. So we always had internet. Like it was a 94, 93. I remember, like, even though I was super young, I remember having internet. There's never a time that we never had it. Um, and so I started fixing computers, doing training, and I realized that I just did not want to be in that IT support kind of role. And so I found the idea of programming interesting because there was a lot of things you could do. Like I like the idea of building something and people using it.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to be a web developer or like building web applications because startups seemed really cool. um, I didn't go to university, so I'm dyslexic, and I always struggled with English, and so I just never made the cut to get into university. And I could have spent a couple years, but I'm impatient, and so I instead focused that time just honing my skills. And I would build websites for small business owners, and then eventually that transitioned into web development. And then from there, I was hired to move over to Europe, where I worked as a CTO. And I then did a few startups, and I just never got that big payout. All the founders did, but and I like technically was a co-founder, but the original co-founders all did really well. I did not do so well, and so I decided to run my own firm, just building apps for startups. Did that for quite a long time. My co-founder decided that they didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't. I never really wanted to do that. I always wanted to build an app and have a team around that. And so, even though that company was doing very well, we spun that down. And then I decided to go back to startups for a bit because I started having kids and I thought I needed stability. I realized there was no stability even in larger startups. And so then I decided that I wanted to go back and build the thing I always wanted to build, which was a ed tech platform.
Hmm.
And so I built that and just started making content. And now we're here.
Awesome. How'd you decide to focus specifically on cloud?
I mean, it wasn't that it was intentional. It was just that I was always kind of doing it. So, like when you build web applications, circa 2009, 2008, um, all the startups in San Francisco, like they
Hmm.
used AWS. I can't remember what it was, 2009, 2010. There was a year where everybody, like if you were a serious startup, you're using AWS. I did not want to use AWS, but it was just it was kind of a signal of a good startup. And so I already was starting to get the skills in that. When I was deciding to transition from the web dev space into cloud, that was because when I was looking to go back to startups after my cloud firm, people were not valuing my skills as they were before. And I think the reason why was the market was becoming saturated with like developers.
Hmm.
Um, People saying that they had the skills when they didn't have the skills. This was brought on by the boot camps. But what I noticed was that a lot of companies were struggling to understand cloud, and they wanted to move their workloads over there and take advantage of the best in class offering. Uh, and so I noticed that like you didn't need anything to land a job with these companies, like the really good paying jobs.
Hmm.
If you even talked about getting a cert and you could show the skills, they were very interested in having that conversation. And for me, I never had to play the resume game. I always just built the thing and showed people what I built, and that was enough. And by word of mouth, I was able to get the work that I had. And I just did not like this idea of having to dig through job postings. And so that's why I focused my energy on cloud. And I apparently already had the skills for it. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I see a lot of that. Definitely when the cloud around, I'd say in my experience, the company I was at the time, were they were kind of kicking the can around with cloud, specifically AWS, and throwing around the buzz term of multi-cloud
Mm-hmm.
strategy. Um, but I really saw it ramp up in 2020 with the pandemic and all, and just the need to have services more readily available to a remote workforce. But they were sending us to these trainings, they were telling us to get like the cloud practitioner, but all of the conversations were, well, let's see what we can really put up there. Let's see what makes sense. I hadn't seen a company that like really had a well thought out, um, just like a well thought out strategy. It was always, let's see what we can do. So I found we were doing these trainings or getting these certs and just not really applying them. Like I know all the AWS terms, but what does this really mean in like everyday work?
And I think that was less of an issue the farther back you go. So, like you go 2016 to 2018, these cloud service providers were not as complex, and
Hmm.
so when you took the certifications, it was more focused on core services, and you could apply that knowledge. But I would just say bloat started to creep in, and by the time of 2020, 21, these certifications became more about being big product tours that every product manager for every product wanted you to know about, and not necessarily have good application in terms of that stuff. So I would say at one point they're really good. Right now, there's not really many alternatives to certifications, but
Hmm.
or people are very convinced that that is still the path forward. But yeah, there is this huge um, gap in terms of application versus what they're trying to do with those certifications. So
So with that gap and you coming from just kind of like an educator trainer perspective, I saw your tweet saying that we needed to have a real talk about hiring in tech and cloud because based on what you were seeing in the job post, it just really wasn't aligning with like the skill sets these certifications are teaching. What's something that you noticed about the job postings in comparison to what's being taught in the certification material?
well, I would just say that every company has their own particular stack, and this is no different than when I was doing, like, I wasn't necessarily branded as cloud, but just working as a developer, like a developer focused kind of tech person. And everyone has their stack, right? And so what I noticed is that companies were putting less emphasis on general cloud skills, and now they're like, okay, we know how to use cloud. We want to dial into our very specific technologies, and we're going to make those hard requirements for you to even consider you, right? So that was
Hmm.
one thing. They've increased the level of experience. I know some folks that are my age or older, and they've saying that that's been around forever. That there's always been a high bar for experience. I don't think so. I feel like there's more diversity in terms of on ramps or entry roles, at least in cloud. But we are returning back to having 3 5 years experience for entry level roles, which
Hmm.
makes no sense whatsoever. But I guess maybe the framing is that they're entry level roles um, for these cloud roles, right? So the expectation is maybe that you were um, a system administrator, a developer, some kind of network engineer, some precursor to it, and now you're taking on this entry level cloud role, which is not entry level. So maybe it's just a misuse of words.
Gotcha. Kind of like we say, and I think the tide is turning. People are starting to really see that cybersecurity isn't technically an entry level role. It does require you to have some background. I do know initially cloud was pushed like, oh, you have no tech experience. You can just come on in and start with this cert and go from there.
And I think a
Uh,
lot of these roles are. Oh, sorry.
oh, go ahead.
I think a lot of these roles are not necessarily entry level. I did air quotes for people who are listening, like solution architect or security engineer. And I mean, like when you just think of the nature of these roles, you would never want to hand this to someone that is inexperienced. Like, something
Hmm.
as a solution architect is as important as architecting something like that takes in pricing, it takes in resources, it takes in the business vision, all this stuff, right? You're not handing that to a junior. And I mean, the other issue is the fact that these roles do not necessarily align with how they are used with many companies. Like if you look at what a solution architect at AWS is, that's a very specific role that AWS created, whereas it's used completely different um, at large cloud firms or dev firms, and then completely different for just companies that use tech, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I have definitely seen just a lot of people kind of go through and collect all of the AWS certs or all of the Azure certs. And I've seen them kind of struggle to either get started or they get into these roles where, like you said, you have the solutions architecture cert, you should be able to really thoroughly define business requirements and align those with what we need in the cloud. How have through your boot camps and just other just interactions with your general audience, how have you um what are some of the challenges you've seen people face? They've gone out, they've gotten these certs, they've done the training, and now either they're struggling to keep up on their job or they're even having a time like finding a job.
So I started spinning up the boot camps because I had made so many free certifications and talking to students at conferences and other places, they were struggling getting work, and so I said, okay, where are you at then? What are you doing to try to close that gap? And they all said, well, I just don't feel like I have any practical experience, so I need project based stuff to do. And so I had tried multiple times to write up community documents and saying like, here are ideas of things you can go build. Nobody would go out and build this stuff. No matter how many times I tried to detail and make large lists, it no one ever tried to tackle this stuff. The only one that I think got traction was the Cloud Resume project by Forrest, which
Hmm.
was more just put, like, it's a fine it's a fine scope for a project, but it was one where they just ask you to do one of uh, it's a very small scope project to put a resume basically up in the cloud. But anyway, so I thought, okay, well, people are saying they really need a project, and so I had some Twitter Spaces and did more research, and it seemed like people really wanted to have accountability, and they wanted someone to lead them through a project, and they wanted it to be real world. So I made it as hard as I could for an intermediate level, um, and we ran that for free because I'm not going to charge for something if I'm running for the first time, even if I have past experience. I think it's unfair to do that. So we ran
Hmm.
it for free, and people really liked it. But I would just say that what I did not realize is that a lot of these people coming in, as soon as they came into this, and I was doing manual grading, and I had seen what their background was, having all these certs. Like there was some people that had like 7 or 8 certs, but they couldn't even write any code. They had never touched GitHub. They did not know how to use Discord or Slack. They had never opened up a ticket before. It was just like, how did they go through all of this technical certification training and not have like a lick of experience? And we're talking like pro and specialty certs. And so I went, okay,
Hmm.
that's interesting. Um, and so I think that we had a lot of people come out of the boot camp and they were really good, but what I found was that even our top people that passed the boot camp, their issue was like they might be like really really good, but they were in a geographical location that was just like they're doomed to fail, right? Like they're like one might have been somewhere like in Egypt, right? And so the market was the market where they were, and nobody was hiring anybody like from the states from Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there was challenges like that, or if people were in the U.S., you know, they might have had a um, like a bachelor's of science in something, so they had and maybe had some adjacent like a technical skill, but not necessarily in the cloud industry or something like that. And they're running up against that experience gap. So like they could show that they could do the work, right? But they're not even getting that opportunity to demonstrate it because the filter is so darn strong right now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that made me think, okay, well, we did the certifications, and that got them part of the way. We did the projects that got them another part of the way, and so now we have to figure out that last mile of closing it. And so that's why I said we need to talk about the state of tech hiring because the approaches that people are taking, they need to approach it differently, and they have to just understand how competitive the market is and why it is the way it is. Because I don't think it was this hard 2 3 years ago, and there's good reasons for it.
What's your theory on those reasons? Because I have some.
And I think theory is a good word or hypothesis, whatever we mean to say, or opinion, because it's very hard to confirm these things. But I
Mm-hmm.
called it a multifaceted problem where there's a lot of things going on. So like obviously COVID is one that accelerated everyone into adopting more technology, and I think that a lot more companies became familiar with cloud technology. So that idea of being able to just say, hey, I have some general cloud skills is just not enough, right? So that raised the bar in that aspect. Um, I think that we've had too many, I'll call it like certificate mills or boot camp mills or diploma mills. The idea of um, teaching not to make people good, but to make money off training. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that we've, I don't want to say exploitative, but the idea um, is that there's a lot of training out there that's not applicable. And so we have a lot of people in the market. And so like when I was even doing hiring like a year and a half ago for a company in Toronto for cloud roles, entry level cloud roles, it was like 300, 400 people applied and it put no effort into marketing it, right? And so once a company hits that kind of volume for even small jobs, it's like now they have to adopt a system like an application tracking system. Um, and especially when COVID hit, everyone thought they could work remote. And so, like, I remember interviewing people and they would pretend that they're in the country, but they're not actually in the country. Um, and it was just crazy. So you know, I kind of understand why companies are putting up harder guardrails, and I think that all the advice that people have been giving, even as of recent, is I think it's just like everybody's doing it, and they're not effectively applying it, and these companies have smartened up, and they're tightening their hiring pipelines. But what are some of your theories?
Um, a lot of what you touched on, especially just the boot camp and certification mills, I know for me specifically in networking, there was just a lot of chatter around using exam dumps and all sorts of boot camps around like CCNA and stuff, and just get your CCNA and Network Plus in like 6 months or 90 days. And I think that people who were doing this, one, exam dumps are one thing, but two, it just became a memorization game. They were just kind of memorizing the information and not really effectively learning it to then be able to apply it. They weren't learning the why behind what they were doing. And because a lot of the entry level certs are pretty much that's your introduction into, the topic, you can kind of get away with it there. You're just kind of like remembering terms, what applies where. But then you couple that with people who are also, embellishing on their resume, if you will. Some people were just flat out lying. And then they get to these roles and they can't perform. Um, so I think that was one thing. And I've kind of seen the effects of that in networking specifically. I've seen places now, you used to be able to just do a CCNA, or if you didn't have your CCNA or maybe it expired, it was so many years of equivalent experience. I've seen so many roles that are requiring just flat out a CCNP, and you have to have it. It has to be a specific one, usually enterprise. And if even if you have the years of experience, they don't want to talk to you. Um, so I'm well aware of that there are other, you know, issues with just the business industry and commercial real estate and um all of that other nuance, but I feel like a lot of what happened during COVID gave corporations the ability to kind of hide behind things they wanted to do anyway, if you will. Taking remote work, for example, everyone likes to say it was because you guys were doing day in the life TikTok videos. I know that's not the case, but these are things that kind of contribute to them being able to say, well, we had remote work and you were doing this. And, we we kind of opened up the gates for people, and we had people lying on their resume or people couldn't do the job. So now we're closing it back up again. So I think those are all contributing factors. For the listeners, because I know someone's going to hear this and be like, that's not the reason. I know it's not the reason, but it's the excuse. And I feel like the only people who are losing out in this is the new people coming in, because they have to now work so much harder to get their first role or even elevate from an entry level role to like a mid level role, depending on the company they're at.
And I wonder if remote work trust has been eroded or because of how many people have been doing, how many people had to ramp up and do it and not have good guardrails or good practices in place. And not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily that remote work doesn't work, but it didn't work based on the way they executed it. Because I've done remote work for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just remember like I felt remote work had more accountability, at least back in the day, or when I say back in the day, even a few years ago, because pre-COVID, because you had to do a lot to, you'd have to like we used to like sit on call all day with people, just like in a Zoom call, and it'd be like constant writing, so constant documentation, and you had to have a very secure space because you're not on site. And I guess anyway, I wonder if there's something there that makes companies less interested in remote workers. Something that I've been hearing more about is like overworking. So I didn't realize that because I have employees, right? So I read this stuff like as a company, like, oh, I wonder what happened if I had to worry about overworking. And the laws in Canada and US are really, really lax that you can get away with working more than one job. Not necessarily a government job, but outside of that, there is that concern. So I kind of understand why companies might be interested in returning to office. Not necessarily saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying I could see excuses as to why they'd point to it, as you suggested there.
Yeah, and definitely your point about just companies not being ready for it. I think um the people that I know who I've seen like their companies are kind of complaining about it were not really remote first companies, or they didn't have some arm of a remote workforce. So that came with extra expenses because they were not ready, an increase in VPN licenses, an increase in cloud costs, even if that came in the form of purchasing new like SaaS licenses or something. So it's definitely for the benefit and for the profit of the company, but I feel like all of these things we've kind of covered are their excuses for, hey, no more remote work. Come into the office.
But you know, and I kind of wonder if like if you're in the job market now, if you highlight as and again, I don't know if anyone's reading resumes anymore anyway because everything's going through ATSs, but if there was some way to highlight your eagerness to work in office, you would think that that would be an advantage for you to get hired in this challenging market. But you know, I'm not certain or confident that that actually that's what matters during the hiring process. But you know, I still think there's a lot of techniques that you can utilize that nobody talks about. None of them are easy to do, but they're definitely not being practiced by a lot of folks. And I just know them because I've put them into practice over the years, just because I'm very entrepreneurial and know how to find opportunity outside of mainstream channels. But I mean, like for you, when you wanted to get a job, what was your strategy? Like, did you just go to LinkedIn or Indeed, or where would you go?
Pretty much just LinkedIn. Um, that's where I found pretty much all of my jobs the last 3, 4, like, except for Twitter. Twitter happened on Twitter, surprisingly. Um, but LinkedIn's pretty much my go-to. I do a good job of kind of scanning the posts and seeing what looks interesting, what aligns with what I want to do, and what makes sense based on my experience. But I so since I've been in networking specifically almost 14 years now, I kind of know what to look for already. What would you say for people who, maybe they've gotten their first tech job or they don't have a job at all? What should they be looking for in job descriptions that kind of align with the projects they've done, the certs they have?
So something that's interesting that you said, which was, you know, you're able to look at roles and know which ones to go after. And,
Hmm.
you know, I've always had a sense of when I see job postings, and I say job postings loosely because I don't necessarily just go on LinkedIn to find jobs if I wanted them for, either for contract or for hire, like as employment. But you know, I could always look at a job and say, okay, there's a 1 in 10 chance that they'll have interest, or 1 in 5 chance that they'll call me back, and I was very confident that that would occur. And so I think that people going out in the market and they look at that, they have no idea what they're looking at. They just everything looks like 1 to 1 million odds, right? And I think that the reason why I'm able to look at that is because I had such a long background as a developer and I understand the other side of what's going on in the decision making, right? And so I know how to detect that in job postings or the listings, and I know how to get people's attention by saying the stuff that I know that they want to hear if I know that the key stakeholder is reading it on the other end. And so, you know, an example would be because I was a Ruby on Rails programmer for years.
Hmm.
Is that and this still works with Ruby on Rails, but like I know that if I went and I looked at Ruby on Rails job postings on a Ruby on Rails job board, that the way they're written, I can tell what the company culture is. I can tell why they're using very specific technologies. And I know that if I highlight them in a particular way, that it's going to get their attention. So, for an example, in Ruby on Rails, there is another technology that some companies like to use called Ember.js. That technology came about because before React, like JavaScript React, um, people were trying to make the Ruby on Rails version of a JavaScript framework, and that was Ember.js. So it's very similar to it. However, not a lot of folks like using that framework because um, they found it a kind of a pain to use, but people that use Ruby on Rails like that framework for it. So there are companies out there where you'll see job postings and you'll see Ember.js. And right away, I know that if you were to demonstrate Ember.js skills,
Hmm.
because it's such an, I wouldn't say it's an outdated skill, but it's a skill that people like don't want to put on their resume. It's more like everyone wants to go after React, Redux, whatever svelte, whatever the news thing is. And so if you say, hey, I built a, I don't know Ember.js, but I spent a day and I built it. And here's my Ember.js skills. And I'm willing to use Ember.js because I understand that you want to use it. On the other side, that company has probably seen 1,000 people going, I just want to rewrite your front end in React, right? Or something, right? And so
Hmm.
I think that's where you see an opportunity to highlight it. The other thing is that when you go into very specific um, uh, technical stacks or cult like tech culture bubbles, um, there's going to be less people that are there. So like again, back to Ruby on Rails, I don't think that they have the same issues. They don't need ATSs. They don't have 400, 500 people applying. And so they're more likely to read the resume directly. Um, and so I think that you have a better opportunity with a cover letter or with your statement in order to get that attention. And so I think that the first thing is like, okay, try to figure out a pattern for a specific type of company, whether it's a tech stack or vertical, so that you can reduce the competitive pool so that key stakeholders are actually going to read what you have. And then try to identify what it is that they actually care about to get their attention. But that's the problem. If you go to LinkedIn and stuff like that, uh, those might not be available to you. So, like for cloud engineer or developers, those are flooded. Now,
Hmm.
I shouldn't say that you can't find anything there. Like I had a student that I taught 5 6 years ago when they came out of a boot camp. I showed them Ruby on Rails, and they just wanted to get a. They just left their last job because that company got acquired and they thought it was going downhill. And so they just went on LinkedIn and specifically searched for Ruby on Rails, and they were getting callbacks from it. Whereas I'm hearing other people applying and they're getting nothing back, right? So I think that narrowing down to very specific things is going to reduce the competition. But I don't know. Have you seen that kind of any of that when you're uh, exploring? Do you kind of see like boundaries in terms of very specific company cultures or technology stacks?
Yeah, I think that so most of my experience has been outside of the quote unquote tech industry. By tech industry standards, I really only had one tech job, and that was Twitter. Um, I have found that I get a much higher response rate in the education, healthcare. My job during COVID was at a publishing company. So what I've been able to do is kind of just look for companies, or what I had done was just look for companies that were not in the quote unquote tech industry, but still had technology at the core of their business, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So, like with the publishing company, they sent out a lot of newsletters. Um, so, email was a very big thing there. They had a lot of homegrown applications. They were doing a lot of, at the time, I was really focused on data center, trying to make my way into security. So, they were focused on a lot of high speed. The network has to be up. We spend money on the latest and greatest because we have to get these emails out. People are paying for these emails. So that's usually, and I'm seeing that advice kind of be, now that the tech industry is having so many layoffs, people are now encouraging people to look beyond the fangs and all the big tech companies, to look for these smaller organizations that have the budget, have technology at the core of their business, where you can kind of grow and utilize your skills.
So for we'll talk about fangs here for a moment or whatever the new initialism is, but like, I have friends that are they're getting laid off and they're getting new jobs at different very large fang-like companies. And it's really all their internal network, right? So I feel that if you want to work at those companies, you really have to have a strong presence and network in whatever they are. So like if I want to go work at AWS, I'm very confident that I could find a role for myself or Azure or Google or whatever. I'm confident that I could work my way in there, and even if I couldn't today, I could do it in 6 months or 9 months. Um, but I think that people that are new to the industry, that's really hard because they're not because like I've already invested, like I say, 6 9 months from the time I want to start that journey to get that job, but like I already have years behind me, like interacting within those communities very deeply. And that's what a lot of these people are that are getting those roles, at least I think. Not to say that there aren't other ways to get those roles, but I feel like that is the way in. But there is those other roles that are technically, as you said, they have tech at the core,
Technology at the core. Yeah.
technology at the core. And so school boards, police departments, law offices, architect firms, medical clinics, nonprofits. So like my co-founder, I mean, I showed him how to get online jobs, like remote jobs, like 15 years ago. But like when I wanted him to quit his job and come here, he was working for the school board. And school boards, they don't post their stuff on LinkedIn or Indeed, at least not in Canada here, and I know it's in the U.S. not so much. They have their own job boards and they're on their own
Mm-hmm.
websites and they have their own hiring processes. Um, and like those are, I think, low hanging fruit. Like if somebody wanted a job in Canada in tech, they can just move up here to Scriber, which is nowhere. And they have no tech talent up here, right? And they can go get a job very easily, uh, and they'll get a pension, right? So it's not like there's no opportunity. It's just like you have to uh, understand like where those jobs are, or like if you want to work at police department, make sure you're a good citizen because that could disqualify you for that. But um, that is another option, and demonstrating your security skills is definitely good. My brother-in-law, like he he wanted to do like he got into just like he had like a networking background. Like he wasn't certified. He just was doing networking for IT networking for companies, and then he worked for a law firm, and they decided to get him to do more security stuff. And so that was his on ramp into security. And so he started taking security certifications, but like he didn't take security certifications before to get the job. He already had a job, and they wanted him to
Mm-hmm.
do that, and it made sense at a law office that there would be a security component there. That makes total sense.
Right.
Um, or like medical clinics, like one of my other friends, they know they did IT work for a shop and like a computer shop, and this computer shop got a contract with one of the local hospitals to host their servers. They didn't know how to do hyper virtualization or cloud, so because he had done that work, he was able to do that. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity. It's just that people only know to go to LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, and then they just hit every single job posting. You know what I mean? Which I mean, there's a lot of opportunity outside those two funnels.
Yeah. You earlier in the conversation, you mentioned the ATS system, and I feel like, especially now with people really trying to find, with the layoffs and people trying to find new jobs and everything, there's been a lot of chatter about that on Twitter specifically and how to get around the ATS system. What advice would you have on that? Because I see people saying, oh, hide the words, change it to like a white font or something, which makes no sense. But
I mean, ATSs are pretty straightforward. You know what I mean? Like you just write your resume. I think the thing that doesn't matter anymore, and I still see this advice, which is terrible advice, but they'll say like when you write your resume, they'll say like tell them like the percentage of how much you've increased production on this particular thing. They'll say like I spun up 1,000 VPs like virtual machines, and I increased efficiency by 20%. That's a strategy that doesn't work anymore, and I feel that things are more contextual in terms of what you did as opposed to like qualitative metrics. It's more quantitative. That makes sense. Quantitative as in descriptive of what you did, not the percentages of the value you brought. If you're tackling ATSs, the reason I say this is because I built a couple ATSs,
mhm,
and so you kind of have an idea of like how it's going to parse the text, but I don't know. I think that ATSs are simply a waste of time. I think that you need to find the hiring manager, or you have to find a key stakeholder somehow, and and get them to read it. So unless you spin up your own ATS system and you feed in resumes, you're not going to know what that looks like. And I think that's really hard because ATSs are there's a lot of custom built ones, and I don't feel like there's an easy way to see the other side of it, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So I still think that the strategy is better to not bother the ATS at all. Like you can submit your resume, but it's more like getting a person at that company to care about it, um, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does you it's interesting you said don't stay away from those quantitative metrics.
Qualitative. I always
Qualitative
get them mixed up.
metrics.
Qualitative is numbers. Qualitative, quantitative. Actually, now I don't know. I'm dyslexic, so I have no idea which is which. But one is number focused, one is more contextual based. And so, like, if it's based on numbers, that doesn't matter. Like, do you think an ATS cares if you did something 30%? Like, it doesn't know. It's not smart enough to know that. And I think enough companies have seen that kind of nonsense to know that that is BS. Um, because, again, it's like, it's just tips that have been put out that are now everybody's doing. You know what I mean? So,
Hmm.
you got to do something. You got to do something different. And again, that's with understanding that hiring side of it. And I don't know. There's a lot out there. So
So early on in my career, I found it was helpful to at least call out the size of the organization and the number of users to be supported, especially when moving into. So I was always in an enterprise environment, but I think that jobs here, school system, especially like a local school system, and they kind of just think, oh, maybe like 100 schools or something. And it was really difficult initially to kind of capture the amount of work that went into managing the school system. So I found that adding those quantitative, I looked it up, those numbers to my resume really helped. I started getting more callbacks. So if you're saying that that doesn't really, it's not super effective, how does one convey that, they were a part of or even led a cloud migration and still kind of show the scale and the size of the migration they were working on without diving into, I saved the company 30% by cutting down 40% of the servers and the
well,
power and et
well,
cetera, et cetera.
I think it's metrics that people care about, right? So if you worked for if you're trying to get a job at the school board and you're trying to say, okay, I know that they're probably this size, like this is their head count, and this is how much money they're spending, stuff like that, and you're speaking to numbers that make sense to them, that makes sense. But I'm saying that I'm just seeing a lot of people putting in quantitative numbers, and it doesn't make any sense, right? So it's not there's nothing to contextualize for that company,
Hmm.
and so I think that it's being overused to a point where it's ineffectual. Something that's interesting that you said, like about gauging the size of a company, but like when I wanted to get a contract for my cloud firm or my dev firm, what I would do is I would go to Crunchbase, and I think it's paid now to get that list, but I would just sort by company size, and I would look for companies that were pre-seed or seed, and I would see how many employees they have, and I would try to figure out if they did raise the money. I would see how much money they raised, and that would really help me determine, where they were at in their company, so that I could frame the information that made sense to them at that stage, at that stage, right? And so I think that's just contextualizing stuff. So whether you use numbers or not, the important part is that does it make sense contextually for the other people on the other side, or are you just trying to embellish all your points in your job descriptions? And I think that's the distinction there that I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yes, that makes sense.
So, but that again, that was one strategy that I used. But like, I never hear of anybody going to Crunchbase and sorting and looking and trying to target local startups and things like that. But I think there are a lot of strategies like that people could employ, that might work. Another thing is like just doing local training. So I mean, I was doing this with innovation centers in Canada because I was just trying to provide free training as a community project. But we would go and
Hmm.
we would contact innovation centers, accelerators, incubators, and say, hey, we're going to provide free training for the community. It's just what we do. And we'll do training. And if you have companies come out, we'll also do some free architecting for them. Right. And so they would come out and we would do a training session. They would find out that they're not very good at working with cloud, and then we would do a one-on-one uh, where we hear like, okay, what are your challenges that you're having? Here, we'll architect it up for you. This is what you can go do. And almost always they'd say, can we hire you? And I said, well, no, we don't do that kind of work. We're just here to get you interested in cloud and to educate you. But there definitely was opportunity, and there's not stopping anybody from doing that. Do you know what I mean? Like anyone that's got their certs and stuff like that, they want to go apply for that. They could go to their local nonprofits, like their chamber of commerce, and offer training. All chamber of commerce generally will have they might have a subcommittee, or they'll have a training component because that stimulates economic development. um you know, again, these are not shortcuts, but they are ways of um creating opportunities that I don't think anybody is going out and doing for whatever reason.
Hmm. Especially now that I think this was obviously this was difficult during the pandemic because we couldn't gather in spaces. But now that that's over, um, yeah, these are great opportunities. What's your thoughts on people kind of showcasing their skill set online via content creation? How can someone stand out from the
um
crowd? Because I think people get into it and they just kind of regurgitate
mhm.
what's already out there, which is not a bad way to start, but it doesn't lead you to, if you're doing this with the end goal of getting a job in mind, how can people create content that will really stand out to like employers?
I think that and I mean I've hired people based on content they've created, um because I was looking for a solution, and they were the only ones that documented it in a way. And so, yes, like only 14 people are going to read it, but I was one person that needed it, and then I wanted to hire that person because they got to that level of complexity and specificity that showed that they demonstrated that skills, and it wasn't them just like faking an article. I think that a lot of people come in and they hear learn in the open, and that's fine. That makes sense. But like, I don't know how many more articles we need of someone making an S3 bucket through ClickOps. Nobody wants to read that. Um, and so this was when we did the boot camps. Like, I had everybody documenting and stuff like that. And part of the grading was me going in and saying, "Hey, you have to do something. You have to show the hard parts that you're doing. So do something different." Not everybody did that. Like 1% of students actually did that. But I would push them and say, uh, use different technologies, push the complexity, and then document the hard parts, because that's what people are interested in, the parts that they can't figure out. Today I was spinning up a database because I'm refreshing AWS content for the solution architect associate, and I'm looking at MemoryDB. MemoryDB is a managed Redis service on AWS. And while I was using it, it's a newer service, and I noticed that it did not have, it did like there was no information in terms of how to programmatically spin it up using the AWS CLI. You
Hmm.
went to the AWS website, and they gave you like one CLI command, and there was like 10 that are missing. And then you go to the documentation, and they're not explaining stuff. So clearly, not a lot of people have executed that this tool programmatically. And so, me making that video and me making those materials and putting them online, that stuff's going to be found because somebody's going to be following that exact path and hitting that stuff. But I think people don't realize what is the value and what is not. And they just think I have to make something. And it's just a lack of practice of understanding what is good materials. So, if that makes sense.
So you mentioned something there that leads me to the next thing I wanted to talk about from two points of view. So AI, obviously that's the latest buzzword. Everyone is on ChatGPT. Everyone's trying to create the thing that's going to be first and lead them to being a thought leader in the space. How do you see AI affecting one, the cloud space from a technical standpoint, and then hiring in the cloud space or in general?
Um, like right now, and I've been using the models quite a bit because I'm trying to get them to produce Terraform code, because one of the things that they could do is save uh, developers, engineers, DevOps folks a lot of time if these things could spit out the stuff that they want to provision. And even with the latest models, they simply can't do it. And the reason they can't do it is because they need the source material in order to do it. So like if GCP launches newer services, but their documentation and the community's documentation that they're scraping from is insufficient, it's never going to be able to produce good code, simply put, because these things are not intelligent enough to do that. And so, despite as much as I've tried to use Gemini and ChatGPT and the Anthropic one, Claudia, Anthropic,
Mm-hmm.
I forget what it's called. And they're getting better at producing like hallucinating code. But the point is that if the well is dry, they cannot produce what it is you need to do, and you're still going to have to do that by hand. So, at some point, maybe we'll like if there is a large enough a code base for them to pull from, that it will really reduce the or it'll make work more competitive because now you don't necessarily need someone to write code. You need someone that can have good problem solving skills, right? And so that takes away a lot of those roles or a lot of the like a lot of the roles that I think would be there. Longer term, it's more interesting to see okay what would it like how will that affect APIs and all these intermediate technologies that we're using like Terraform and stuff like that. Do we need them anymore? Is there something more low level that is more efficient for these tools to use? Um, and so, I think that we might see new development tooling that might be produced, like where it's like more of something that looks more like test code as opposed to writing a configuration specifications.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or it's just like doing analysis. So people that are doing SRE and stuff like that, they have to try to analyze to determine the root cause of problems. But I think that fundamentally, the way the technologies work have to change to best leverage whatever the kind of automation these AI tools can do. And so I think that we're safe for 3 to 5 years. But after that, I have no idea what the tech market's going to look like. But I would just say that despite as much as I use AIs, like AI tools, they don't benefit me like an experienced person. They just might save me some time in some areas.
Gotcha.
But what's your experience been with AI? Has it made anything obsolete for you?
Not anything obsolete, pretty much just like you said, it's allowed me to do things a little bit faster. Um, I have also kind of set up my own little GPTs for like Cisco documentation. So just uploading like the admin guide, and then I can like quickly tell it, hey, I can ask it a question and tell it, spit out, what pages this is referenced on. So it's kind of made researching a little bit faster. From a content creation standpoint, it has helped me just better align what I'm trying to do. But I haven't used it to like, write any articles or anything because I found that when I did tell it, hey, generate an article in my voice, it misses the mark every time. I'm like, if I publish this, everyone will know GPT wrote it.
Yeah, I haven't had much
um,
luck for content creation. I mean, the only thing that it really
yeah.
helps me is try to bring CLI commands, or it's some like it has to be very basic stuff that I don't want to go look up. Like I want to spin up a simple Apache server. Give me the commands. But
Hmm.
still, lots of tweaking required. So yeah, definitely speeds that up. But like I think that there's more due diligence for checking things now. So like my process before was I'd always go to the docs anyway, but now I have to even if it produces everything, I still have to go and look and double, triple check, and also have to say, did it steal this from somewhere? Because I've had that
Hmm.
before where I'll just like I'll literally copy paste parts of it into the browser, and then I'll notice like, oh, it pulled it from this article here, right? So I'm
Hmm.
going, okay, I can't just copy paste what I get from ChatGPT, even if it sounds good, and that's a challenge. So, but that's content
I
creation. So, pardon?
There's a lot of just content around leveraging Chat GPT for like job searching and comparing your resume to the job posting. And I've also seen people like, give it a job posting and tell it, spit out some possible interview questions. What are your thoughts on job seekers using it in that manner?
I haven't evaluated that myself in that case, so I'm not sure how good it is. But I can talk about somebody that was not necessarily job like for hiring, but they're saying, I'm going to use LLM models to completely teach me how to learn cloud and to architect and to do stuff. And they were
Mm.
like 100% convinced that they could do it. That they said, generate a project idea for me, tell me the steps I have to execute it in. And they got to a point where they could not proceed any further. They would produce like these architectural diagrams that were the most bizarre looking things ever. Um, and I think that, to a point that it will work, but I think that it's always going to miss the mark because it just isn't a human, right? It doesn't understand the end to end process. And I think that as a person that's applying stuff, you have to get into the head of the people that are trying to hire you or that pipeline, and I just don't think it has that level of intelligence to do it. So just as you said, it can't write in your own voice. Um, I think you can use it if you don't have anything else, but I think it might fall short there. So, but again, I have to evaluate it, and that's something that'd be interesting to try out.
Awesome. So my last question, to just close everything out, what does thriving in tech mean to you?
For me, it just means that I'm able to do the things that I want to do. So, like at one point, I was able to get a job, make $300,000 in Toronto, working as a CTO or more. But I found that I was just getting burnt out, and I did not enjoy that, and um, it just wasn't something that I wanted to do. What I really wanted to do was just have a year's worth of food supply and be able to have a lot of time to just have time with my family or my hobbies. And so thriving in tech for me is, doing what I am doing now, being able to teach people. And even if I'm making considerably less, at least, I can enjoy my time on this earth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen people, this conversation has kind of popped up periodically where people are making, these dream salaries. You mentioned 300K. How do you decide to just kind of walk away from that? Like, was there an anxiety, a fear about it, or was it just like, I'm tired of this, I'm gonna make an exit plan and I'm done?
I would just say it was higher risk. So like, again, I was focused on startups. So, you'll get that salary, but the idea is that, is that job going to hold for 2, 3 years because it's highly volatile, and, you are working with, like like investors are investing in your company. You're just one of many horses in a racehorse, and they're running them to exhaustion, right?
Hmm.
So that didn't make sense to me. The other issue is that it really kept me in Toronto, which was very expensive, or move somewhere else, and there's a cost to moving and all that stuff like that. So even if you're making those higher salaries, you're not necessarily taking that all home. The other part was like when you're in that kind of culture, everybody wants you to spend. And so even if you want to, like, let's say live in a like make 300,000, live in a basement apartment, people want you to have the nice condo, people want you to have the nice clothes, spend the money, and it's very hard to dial back your expenses. I don't know how else other people do that, and so I felt that I was never reinvesting the money very well. So health wise, it was not doing good numbers on my health. I was just working all the time and being super stressed, and it didn't make any sense. So I don't know. For me, it just didn't work out. I know people that are able to do that for X amount of years and squirrel away the money, and their knees or their knees, their legs, and everything else work good. But I didn't work out for me. So
Gotcha. Well, thank you for sitting down with me today. Where can everyone, our listeners, find your content?
I have my own website. It's exampro.co. I guess you can also use the Canadian domain. It's been hooked up forever, but I never promote it, which is exampro.ca. I'm on Twitter as Andrew Brown. I'm on LinkedIn as Andrew-WC-Brown. I'm not anywhere else because I can't seem to get my own username, and I refuse to sign up for new social platforms where I can't get my handle. Yeah, or if you're in Canada, come to Scriber and visit me here.
Awesome. I will be sure to put all of those links in the show notes. Thanks for joining me today, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.